like to call this meeting of your Newark City Council to order. Autumn, please call the roll.
Ms. Hall.
Here.
Mr. Labutus.
Here.
Mr. Lang.
Present.
Mr. Marmee.
Present.
Mr. Rath.
Here.
Mr. Blake.
Here.
Mr. Bub.
Here.
Mr. Koss.
Here.
Mr. Fennell.
Here.
And Mr. Frazier.
Present.
We have all here this evening. Will you please rise for the invocation by Mr. Labutus, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Shall we pray? Heavenly Father, as we come to you in prayer this evening, we thank you for the beautiful day that you've given us and for us to enjoy. I just ask that you be with us this evening in our discussion as we seek to do the best for the city of Newark and that which we have been entrusted. Be with us this evening, in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Mr. Labutus. Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next on the agenda, we have caucus. That's the time for council to discuss anything pertaining to the agenda tonight. Do we have anything? Next, we have the minutes of our May 20th, 2019 meeting. So a motion to approve those? Motion by Mr. Labutus.
Second.
Second by Mr. Frazier. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That passes. Thank you. We have two reports this evening of standing committees, one from Finance and one from Service. Without objection, those will be received and filed. We have no reports this evening from city officials. We have one communication from Deborah Brown, a letter regarding emergency transport services and billing. Without objection, that will be received and filed. There are two sections for comments from citizens. One is now before the legislation and one is after. This is not a debate with council. This is just your opportunity to be heard. Do we have anyone for this first section? If so, just please raise your hand and we will call you up in order. Okay. Moving on. Ordinances on the first reading, 19-11.
Ordinance 19-11 by Mr. Rath, Mr. Koss, Mr. Marmee, an ordinance approving the editing and inclusion of certain ordinances and resolutions as part of the various component codes of the codified ordinances, providing for the adoption of new matter in the updated and revised codified ordinances, repealing ordinances and resolutions in conflict therewith, and declaring an emergency.
19-11 is on the first reading, but it is an emergency. What is your wish?
Mr. President,
Mr. Rath?
I'd like to make a motion to adopt 19-11.
Motion by Mr. Rath.
Second.
Second by Mr. Frazier. Is there any discussion on 19-11?
Mr. President,
Mr. Rath?
this is a standardized piece of legislation that we do periodically to update publications. The reason for the emergency clause is to meet those publication deadlines.
Thank you, Mr. Rath. Anyone else? Autumn, please call the roll to vote.
Ms. Hall.
Yes.
Mr. Labutus.
Yes.
Mr. Lang.
Yes.
Mr. Marmee.
Yes.
Mr. Rath.
Yes.
Mr. Blake.
Yes.
Mr. Bub.
Yes.
Mr. Koss.
Yes.
Mr. Fennell.
Yes.
And Mr. Frazier.
Yes.
19-11 passes 10-0. Next, resolutions on the second reading, 19-35.
Resolution 19-35 by Mr. Marmee, Mr. Rath, Mr. Koss, Mr. Labutus, Mr. Frazier, and Mr. Lang, a resolution authorizing and directing the Director of Public Service to enter into a lease purchase agreement with Park National Bank for the lease purchase of one EMS transport medic unit for the Division of Fire.
You've heard the second reading of 19-35. What is your wish?
Mr. President,
Mr. Rath?
I'd like to make a motion to adopt 19-35.
Motion to adopt by Mr. Rath.
Second.
Second by Mr. Frazier. Is there any discussion on 19-35?
There is not.
Seeing none, I'll please call the roll to vote.
Ms. Hall.
Yes.
Mr. Labutus.
Yes.
Mr. Lang.
Yes.
Mr. Marmee.
Yes.
Mr. Rath.
Yes.
Mr. Blake.
Yes.
Mr. Bub.
Yes.
Mr. Koss.
Yes.
Mr. Fennell.
Yes.
And Mr. Frazier.
Yes.
19-35 passes 10-0. Next, we move on to 19-36.
Resolution 19-36 by Mr. Marmee, Mr. Rath, Mr. Koss, Mr. Labutus, Mr. Frazier, and Mr. Lang, a resolution authorizing and directing the Director of Public Service for the City of Newark, Ohio to enter into a purchase agreement for the purchase of 4 police cruisers and 2 detective cars for the Division of Police.
You've heard the second reading of 19-36. What is your wish?
Mr. President,
Mr. Rath.
I'd like to make a motion to adopt 19-36.
Motion to adopt by Mr. Rath. Second by
Second.
Mr. Koss. Sorry. Someone over here, I just trying to figure out. Mr. Koss. Any discussion on 19-36? Seeing none, I'll please call the roll vote.
Ms. Hall.
Yes.
Mr. Labutus.
Yes.
Mr. Lang.
Yes.
Mr. Marmee.
Yes.
Mr. Rath.
Yes.
Mr. Blake.
Yes.
Mr. Bub.
Yes.
Mr. Cost?
Yes.
Mr. Fennell?
Yes.
And Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
19-36 passes 10-0. Next, we have 19-41.
Resolution 19-41 by Mr. Marmee, Mr. Rath, Mr. Cost, Mr. Labutus, Mr. Frazier, Mr. Lang, a resolution authorizing and directing the mayor of the city of Newark to submit an application to the Ohio Department of Public Safety Office for federal fiscal year 2020 Ohio Traffic Safety Grants Program Selective Traffic Enforcement Programs, the Impaired Driving Enforcement Program, and Drug Driving Enforcement Program.
You've heard the second reading of 19-41. What is your wish?
Mr. President,
Mr. Marmee.
make a motion to adopt Resolution 19-41.
Motion to adopt by Mr. Marmee.
Second.
Second by Mr. Frazier. Is there any discussion on 19-41? Seeing none, I'll please call the roll vote.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
Mr. Lang?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Cost?
Yes.
Mr. Fennell?
Yes.
And Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
19-41 passes 10-0. Next, on the second reading, we have 19-42.
Resolution 19-42 by Mr. Marmee, Mr. Cost, Mr. Labutus, Mr. Rath, Mr. Frazier, Mr. Lang, a resolution appropriating monies for the current expenses of the municipal corporation.
You've heard the second reading of 19-42. What is your wish?
Mr. President,
Mr. Lang.
I'd like to make a motion to adopt Resolution 1942.
Motion to adopt by Mr. Lang.
Second.
Second by Mr. Frazier. Is there any discussion on 19-42? Seeing none, I'll please call the roll vote.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
Mr. Lang?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Cost?
Yes.
Mr. Fennell?
Yes.
And Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
19-42 passes 10-0. Finally, on the second reading, we have 19-43.
Resolution 19-43 by Mr. Marmee, Mr. Cost, Mr. Labutus, Mr. Rath, Mr. Frazier, Mr. Lang, a resolution directing the application of increased gasoline and diesel tax revenues exclusively to paving projects.
Heard the second reading of 19-43. What is your wish?
Mr. President,
Mr. Marmee.
make a motion to adopt Resolution 19-43.
Motion to adopt by Mr.
Second.
Marmee. Second by Mr. Rath. Is there any discussion on 19-43?
Mr. President,
Mr. Blake?
move to amend Resolution 1943. The amendment should be in your packets.
Okay. Tell us what the amendment is.
The amendment is to target these funds that generally would go to paving in the current legislation. I'm wanting to amend it so that it goes to collector and local streets and roads.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Fennell. Is there any discussion on the amendment on 19-43?
Mr. President.
Mr. Blake?
Thank you, Mr. President. As we know, the city engineer currently gets money from the license plate permissive tax, the current state gas tax dollars that we receive, capital improvement dollars, community development block grant funds, and he will still remain to continue to get those funds. These dollars are specific to any new revenue that the legislature passed, which the gas tax will be coming to the city of Newark. So this is brand new revenue. So any matching dollars that he would need to get, he has current funding to do that. And so we're wanting to, at least I'm wanting to, expressly say that this should go to collector roads and local roads. These are roads that our citizens live on. These many times roads that have not been paved in many years, and so trying to set aside some type of dedicated funding source for these types of projects. And so that's the intent of the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Blake. Anyone else? Mr. Rath?
Yeah, I'm not going to support this in any way, shape, or form. Quite honestly, the more monies that we have available that are allowed to go towards matching funds, the better. If I can spend $1 and pave a mile, or I have an opportunity to spend $1 and pave 2 miles, I'm going to take advantage of the opportunity and spend $1 and pave 2 miles every time. So the more money we have towards matching available, the better. I see absolutely no reason to limit that in any way, shape, or form. We've got an engineer who has done an incredible job at keeping our infrastructure sound and moving forward, and we've had an incredibly difficult time catching up from previous administrations who neglected our roads over a long period of time. there's a plan in place. Our engineer is incredibly qualified, and this is a legislative body, not an administrative body. I'm going to definitely vote in favor of allowing our administrator and our engineer, Brian Moorhead, to allow him to do his job and to do it the best that he can, seeing how he's done an incredible job up until now. So I will definitely not be voting for this.
Thank you, Mr. Rath. Anyone else?
Mr. President.
Mr. Rader?
Yeah, I'm also not in support of this. When it comes to the opportunity that we have of bringing additional funds to the city through the gas tax through the state of Ohio, the ability for us to leverage that for the best use, the confidence that I have is in the engineer's office doing the right prioritization and targeting through a systematic, progressive method in order to make sure that the greatest impact for dollar is spent. And so at the end of the day, I'm okay with leaving the language as in, that it is in, and not amending it. And ultimately, I look forward to the opportunity that we have of getting matching funds for this additional revenue. That'll be.
Mr. Treasurer, anyone else that hasn't spoke?
Mr. President.
Mr. Lyon?
Yeah, I'm also opposed to this amendment. We've received an email from our engineer, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but one of the things that really stuck out to me was his discussion of the fact that most of his projects are a mix of arterial roads and locator roads and all different classifications. And so tracking dollar for dollar where the dollars go, he said it'd be nearly impossible to track. To me, this is an attempt by the legislature to override the whole purpose that we have an engineer. He should have a program in place. If we've got complaints or money's not being allocated in a way that folks like, then I think we should have some discussions with the engineer about our paving program. But I think that's why we have an engineer, just for that reason, to have a paving program, have those priorities. And I'm fully comfortable allocating the full amount of the gas tax to our engineers so that we can pave as many roads as possible and make as efficient use of that money as we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lange. Anyone had commented? Mr. Cost?
I don't think anyone has an argument. I don't think there's any argument that there are neighborhood streets that severely need paved. No doubt about it. But I think we need to, first of all, in my opinion, let the engineer do his job. But I think we need to find a balance. We need to find a balance to how heavy a traffic there is on the street and how much time can be before it needs repaved. But at the same time, take a look at the current condition of a neighborhood street and see what needs done there, a neighborhood street or a collector street. I have found that when I've had citizens call in and question the conditions of their neighborhood street, I have forwarded that on, and I have found that there has been action. There is a willingness to work to get that street paved or to get it repaired, and I think we should have that kind of input. I think we should let them know when there are streets that need done, and make sure that we're finding a balance in how we're approaching this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cost. Mr. Blake?
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to remind my colleagues that matching funds only go to arterial roads or collector roads. Matching funds do not go to local road projects. And so the only avenue that we have for funding local roads is our own resources, is our own revenue. And so the argument for having matching dollars for local roads is not valid. Those matching funds only go to arterial roads and collector roads. The local roads do not get matching funds. And I just want to say that our people out there, many of us have been to several community events. People want their roads maintained and paved, and they want a regular road maintenance. And this is a way to provide dedicated funding so that local roads, neighborhood roads, can be paved. And so I understand and I respect Brian. That's not a issue here. I respect Brian, but at the same time, we have to put priorities. And I would say I'm going to vote for neighborhood roads, and I want to give people, our taxpayers, deserve some type of return on their investment. And I would like to dedicate some money towards neighborhood roads. Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Blake. Ms. Hall?
Yes, I just wanted to say, I agree with Brian Moorhead, our engineer. I think he does a great job. I've had several calls from residents, and when I pass that on, their alleys get repaired as they can. Their alleys, their streets. I think he's done a great job, so I'm going to have to, I can't support the amendment. Thank you.
Mr. Fennell?
I mean, I think the reason that I'm in support of this amendment is because I believe that we have so many neighborhood streets and this is, that haven't been paved in such a long time. And I know that I'm not saying that Brian Moorhead has not been responsive, but I think this would almost empower him to be able to kind of allocate these and not feel pressured to necessarily only pave these kind of main thoroughfares as well. And I know one of the number one complaints that I get are these kind of side small streets that we have. And so I think this is a direct response to being able to, I guess, respond to the people that contact us and our constituents and the needs that they have on their streets specifically. And I think, in the presentation that we just had about the rebranding, this was about taking the revitalization from the downtown and also putting it in other neighborhoods. And I think that this would be a step forward in that direction, which is why I would be supporting this amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Fennell. Mr. Frazier? Oh, Mr. Marmee.
Thank you, Mr. President. Brian Moorhead, our city engineer, has always had to set priorities. Priorities that are usually set when you're limited in funds. You have to take care of the roads that are most heavily traveled and that create the biggest safety concern. He has to consider safety. He has to consider a lot of different things. These funds coming to our city with this new gas tax are going to allow him to do those other streets still in a priority manner, just as he has been doing. To say that it's the only funding method that's possible, that is not a correct statement. 100% of our CDBG could be utilized towards street paving, but we choose not to because we give it to other entities in our community. CDBG just has to be utilized in low-income areas, and you can use it 100% for paving if you wish. So if you wanted to do that, if you want another funding source, go after CDBG. There's 100% you could go after if that's what your desire is. So I'm going to stick with the fact that we have the money. We're going to allow our engineer to do more than he's been able to do in the entire time he's been the engineer. I can tell you that because we've never had any kind of funding like this that can be specifically used for street paving. The money for the license plate permissive tax, that doesn't even, it barely pays for a lot of the studies that we have to do for the different projects, and that's where that allows Brian to do a lot of his work where he doesn't have to come in for every little study that needs to be done in order to pave a road or to fix a bridge or to do this or do that. So I think he's done a great job, and I want to continue to support him in the job that he does in setting the priorities and working with the water department and the stormwater and doing all that together collectively and not strapping his hands if a water main breaks on 21st Street that he doesn't have money to fix it or do anything with street paving or something along those lines. So I'm not going to support the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Marmee. Mr. Frazier?
And just one last piece, kind of echoing that, is the opportunity cost that would arrive if anybody really supported this amendment. And what would occur is there'd be projects that wouldn't be funded with matching federal dollars. We would still pave the local streets like we do now. With the additional dollars comes a great opportunity for the city, and it would be a wrong direction for us to pigeonhole that and set ourselves up for not really a long-term gain. And so with that, I stand by my remarks, and I appreciate the remarks of the other council members.
Anyone else? Please call the roll vote. We're voting on the amendment.
Ms. Hall?
No.
Mr. Labutus?
No.
Mr. Lang?
No.
Mr. Marmee?
No.
Mr. Rath?
No.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
No.
Mr. Koss?
No.
Mr. Fennell?
Yes.
Mr. Frazier?
No.
My count is the amendment fails 8-2. Now we'll move back to 19-43 unamended. We have a motion and a second. Is there any other conversation or discussion about 19-43? Autumn, please call the roll vote.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
Mr. Lang?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Cos?
Yes.
Mr. Fennell?
Yes.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
19-43 passes 10-0 as read. Next, we move to resolutions on the first reading, 19-44.
Resolution 19-44 by Mr. Marmee, Mr. Cos, Mr. Rath, a resolution authorizing the mayor of the city of Newark to enter into a community development block grant funded subrecipient agreement with the hereinafter named organizations to carry out activities included within Newark's fiscal year 2019 community development block grant 1-year action plan.
19-44 will be held for 2 weeks to our next meeting. Next, we have 19-45.
Resolution 19-45 by Mr. Marmee, Mr. Cos, Mr. Rath, a resolution appropriating monies for the current expenses of the municipal corporation.
Mr. President,
Mr. Marmee.
I make a motion to waive the 2-day reading rule on Resolution 19-45.
Motion to waive the 2-day reading rule by Mr. Marmee.
Second.
Second by Mr. Frazier. Mr. Marmee.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have some payouts for employees that we have to expedite. Also, we have a grant that needs to get back in so then they can replenish some supplies.
Thank you, Mr. Marmee. Autumn, please call the roll to waive the 2-day reading rule.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
Mr. Lang?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Cos?
Yes.
Mr. Fennell?
Yes.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
2-day reading rule has been waived. Mr. Marmee.
Thank you, Mr. President. Make a motion to adopt Resolution 19-45.
Motion to adopt 1945 by
Second.
Mr. Marmee, second by Mr. Frazier. Is there any other discussion on 19-45? Seeing none, I'll please call the roll vote.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
Mr. Lang?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Cos?
Yes.
Mr. Fennell?
Yes.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
19-45 passes 10-0. And finally, this evening on the first reading, we have 19-46.
Resolution 19-46 by Mr. Cos and Mr. Rath, a resolution appropriating monies for current expenses of the municipal corporation.
And 19-46 will be held for 2 weeks until our next meeting. And that concludes our legislation this evening. Thank you for your attention. Next, we have our second opportunity for comments from citizens. Again, the same rules apply. This is not a debate of the council. This is just your opportunity to be heard. If you'd like to speak, please raise your hand and I'll call you out. Ma'am? Anyone else?
Rochelle Volan-Smith, 237 Violet Court. I guess I wasn't prepared for the topic of the roads. And for the most part, I feel that a lot of roads are well done, but a lot of the neighborhoods are being sorely neglected. At best, they get patch jobs that last maybe a year or two, and then they need to be done again. There are areas in the city that have not been done in 50 years, and I can think of ones particularly in some of the lower socioeconomic and middle class neighborhoods that have been, at best, gotten patch jobs that have not lasted. And I can think of some areas where the potholes are like over a foot deep. It's ridiculous, and it's insulting to the public. I think it shows. I've talked to a number of people about the topic, and they've told me they feel neglected, and I think this needs to be addressed. Thank you.
Okay. Sir? I forgot to say, if you just give us your name and address for the record.
Tom Grummey.
Well, when you get up here. Sorry.
Tom Grummey, 90 North Buena Vista Street. I'm here for lack of just any other alternatives. It's due to false police reports being filed, admitted by the cops, the police. I've even tried to talk to all the way up through to the chief of police. He had a meeting with the mayor, so he couldn't talk to the public. That was his statement. Didn't have time for the public. The police report was filed. They admitted it was wrong. It has to do with my son's death on 21st Street back on October 29th. I have been dealing with this, trying every alternative, contacting everybody I could. I haven't tried to sit on your side or anything, but I'd just like to try to get some information on this and get the records set straight. The police are telling me that the report that was filed by a patrol officer, filed incorrectly, and now that it's been filed, their system will not allow them to go back in and recorrect it or do any changes to it once it's been filed. The investigating officer is not even the one that filed the report, so like I said, it was admitted by the police that it was incorrectly filed, so it's a false police report. And I would like to get it changed or an addendum put to it correctly. I've even talked to the witnesses, and the witnesses said the police didn't even contact them after the accident to get an revised statement from them or anything, because there was like 7 statements and they were all off the wall, and to try to sort them out was just a little ridiculous. So I called the people and actually got what they were talking about when their statements were made. But I would just like to know, who do I have to see to get this straightened out? I mean, I've tried to call everybody down to Newark Police Department, including the chief of police, and I've got nothing but the runaround or no calls, being told I don't have time. They don't have time for me. So who do I have to see to get this straightened out?
Are you done?
Yes.
Mr. Bond, did you want to add something? Or
okay.
After the meeting, if you would just, Mr. Bond's in the back. He's the safety director. He oversees all the safety forces, so
okay.
He will talk to you, and that would probably take care of it. Ma'am. Dwayne, you want to speak, right? Yes. Anyone else? Okay.
First of all, I'd like to say good evening. How's everybody doing? I hope they're doing well.
Name and address, please.
My name is Callie Rucker, and I reside at 130 Delmar Avenue, Newark, Ohio, 43055. Well, my main concern tonight is I'm still dealing with the homeless sites and the homeless people. This is something that I'm very passionate about. Like I try to tell people, any one of us could become homeless today. Let there a tornado or something come in. I think most of you all probably remember what was going on up in Dayton, the issues that were going on up there. And they had a tornado, and people become homeless. I'm quite sure they probably said, why do people become homeless? There it is right there. Okay, if you abuse a dog, you get fined and go to jail. If you destroy somebody's homeless property, nothing will be done about it. These are human beings just like we are. I want to know, where's the passion for these young men and young women? Everybody think that everybody's homeless is a drug addict, which is not true. And like I said before, we as human beings have to go through your family tree. Because a lot of times, if you don't know what's in your family tree, and you have a perfect family, well then this is not for you. Everything in the universe is in our family, whether you like it or not. I had the privilege of hanging out with the younger generation. They don't like to be called millennium because I talk to a lot of them. We have to come down to their level. I had a wonderful time. They knew how to act. They was just out having a good time. And no matter what the adults try to do, they're going to keep right on doing exactly what y'all told them not to do. And you got to remember that one day, these young men and women is going to be taking care of us. They're going to be making decisions for us. And they're going to be telling us what to do. Another thing, too, is you treat these the younger generation like they're nobody. I've seen it happen. We have to come down to their level. Talk to them. The homeless people, talk to them. And I notice a lot. I've seen a lot of times people laugh at people down here. People up there laughing at the one down here. In about 5 years, the one that they were laughing at, they'll be down there, and the one that they laughed at, they'll be up there. You don't laugh at people. You don't do people wrong. Nobody's perfect. And my advice for you all, when you all are grown, some of the younger generation act better than we adults do. Ask me how I know, because I come down to their level. We don't know everything. We have to include them in our circle. We have to talk to them and not at them. Homeless. Matter of fact, I seen the film about Akron, detention in Akron. And it's a shame how these people are being treated. No one should be treated like that. We're all human beings. And when people go home tonight, they're in their nice warm beds, watching TV. And I'm not saying what people do. They probably get in their bed, don't even think about the people that lost their homes, the people, the homeless people. They're probably going about their business. We have to do what we can, why we can, for people. And like I say, until you know your whole family tree, that it's best for people to love one another, look out for one another, and take care of one another. Because this land do not belong to one generation, it belongs to everybody. I don't care who you are, we are all God's children. And another thing I read in the paper about the LGBT, people having issues about that. Like I said, I hung out with the younger generation Saturday, and I asked them about it. They could care less. They could care less about this, what's going on, because they understand we're all human beings, like I said before. They act better than the adults. We're supposed to set an example for them. It's a shame. And it's every time you see they're doing this, well, listen, I would rather for them to be doing that than be drugging and killing somebody. We always done to judge them. They judge you all too. They judge you all too, because I hung out with them. And I loved everything about them that I saw. And I have some papers here that all the homeless site that they're giving for the kids during the school, while school is out. It's a problem. You may not think it's a problem, but it's a problem. And it's time for us to do something in the city of Newark. Maybe we have to set an example for these people. And with this, I'm finished, and I hope everybody have a good afternoon. And think about it. Just think about the homeless people. We could be homeless today. Let the authority to come through here. We could be homeless. So on that note, like I say, everybody have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Dwayne.
Dwayne Anderson, 914B Empire Drive. I'm glad the City Council voted on the amendment like they did. That $1.1 million, it cost approximately $100,000 or a little more to do 1 mile. Whereas if you did just spots here and there and where have you, that cost goes up because the equipment has to move and the time involved and all that. So thank you, City Council, for voting like you did on that amendment.
Thank you. Any city officials this evening? Honorable Law Director.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll pass.
Thank you. Mayor Hall.
I will pass this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Ms. Hall.
I will pass. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Levitas. I will pass. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Levitas. Mr. Lang.
Mr. President, it was incredibly frustrating a few days ago to receive from one of my colleagues a proposed amendment that absolutely had no background or explanation what we hope to accomplish. And thankfully, somebody shared with me the article in the paper that at least helped me discern the point of this amendment. Apparently, the choice was made to make an announcement via the press rather than with our colleagues directly. And ironically, the article mentioned a desire for better communication and transparency, and I absolutely agree. I think it should be a priority for how we operate the city government, and council should lead by example. And so when I proposed amendments, I've always tried to provide background, explanation to my colleagues ahead of time so that we can facilitate some thoughtful dialogue, brainstorming questions, input, and that has led to some good ideas, some refinement of things before they come to council. And for amendments especially, I think it's important that at a minimum we highlight and make clear what the changes are that we're even proposing. Others have taken this approach recently. Most recent that come to mind, Mr. Frazier on the CRA or Director Rhodes and Baum with the EMS billing. We sat down, we had an opportunity to talk about it. But all the ideas were kind of presented in a way that we could at least brainstorm and refine them a little bit. But I shouldn't have to read an article in the paper to figure out what one of my colleagues is trying to do with an amendment to a piece of legislation. And I certainly shouldn't have to parse through an amendment word by word to figure out what the changes are that are going to be proposed. I don't know why this amendment was presented in this manner. Not sure if it was about getting legislation passed or making a political point in the media. But the choice to approach it in this manner seems to me to be the opposite of promoting transparency and collaboration. How could we even begin to work together on this when it's presented in this kind of opaque manner? This job should never be about personal notoriety or gain. We have to check our egos and ourselves at the door, and this should be about what's best for the people who elect us to do this job. And I hope everyone understands that that's easier to do when we make decisions, when we work together and we collaborate together and talk to each other. And with that, I just respectfully ask my colleague for better communication and transparency when proposing legislation or amendments in the future. With that, I'll pass.
Thank you, Mr. Lang. Mr. Marmee.
Thank you, Mr. President. I need to call a Finance Committee meeting. Also, I am going to just put something out there just because it was mentioned about potholes. I hope that everybody in the city uses the C-Click Fix. It's a great tool. I've never yet had a time where either myself or I've helped somebody get to that website that the city has not responded within 48 hours. And usually it's 24 hours unless there's inclement weather. But they get on that really quick, and it's the easiest way. Half the potholes in the city of Newark, our folks don't even know about them, or they don't know about them until they do become like big craters. So the more that folks get on that C-Click Fix and kind of utilize that, so then our street department gets on it right away, the better off it is. And yeah, in the wintertime, it's the cold patch, and it's not going to last hardly through the winter, but it'll at least keep it from spreading until they can get the hot mix on there maybe in the summer. So utilize that, and that way it makes our city more efficient. It makes the workers able to get to those quicker, and they can organize their day because it's all right there on this computer, and it pretty much tells them what they need to do. So I would encourage all citizens to start utilizing that C-Click Fix. So with that, I pass.
Thank you, Mr. Marmee. Mr. Rapp?
Thank you. I'm going to call a service committee meeting for the 17th, and I was going to say a couple of different things, but I'll just lead it with Mr. Lang, well said. Mr. Marmee, well said. Thank you for stealing my thunder. But yeah, the C-Click Fix works incredibly well, and I report potholes all the time. If you see potholes that are out there, please call. I'm your local councilman. Call me, send me an email, send me a text message, whatever it is, or go to the C-Click Fix website, and those will get repaired, like Mr. Marmee said, within 24 to 48 hours. There's no reason for them to be around, and they are incredibly responsive to them. I would say that voting for 19-43 today, which has to do with the additional monies going towards paving, is an incredible victory and a vote for seeing huge improvements in our roads. You are going to see improvements in the main thoroughfares, but because of this, you are also going to see huge improvements and much progress in our secondary and tertiary roads as well. Don't expect to see those improvements in August. This is a process, and it takes time for that money to come in. But you will absolutely see improvements in the next year or two or three. There's a long road to hoe. When I say that these roads went neglected, I mean we went through 2 terms where I don't believe there was $1 spent on paving. That is very difficult to recover, and we've spent a lot of time trying to recover from that. And it's been a very long road to hoe. but they've done a great job of it so far, and we've got some major improvements thus far, and I'm very happy that we'll have more coming in the future. Very happy about two different pieces of legislation that I had an opportunity to sponsor, and that's bringing in a new EMS transport unit for the fire department, and 4 squad cars and 2 detective cars for the police department. Always great, always happy to be able to provide with them what they need. Let's see, before I get on to the main topic, I want to make sure I covered everything else I want to cover. So, the main topic that I'm upset about, a little bit more than upset, to be quite honest with you. On Monday, May the 27th, Memorial Day, that evening, anybody remember that evening? I know that 3 times my cell phone went off with an emergency text message. 3 times I got an email with an emergency message, and 3 times my cell phone rang with an emergency message saying that we had a tornado warning. I'm very thankful for that. I'm glad that happened. After those 3 messages came, I heard a tornado siren that went off for about 30 seconds. It's not hard for me to hear that tornado siren. It's a block and a half away from my home. I didn't miss it beforehand. They didn't go off. We've got a system in Licking County that is horribly broken. I read the article in the Advocate, and I understand, and I talk about this all the time, there are 2 sides to every story. I understand that. I'm reading some lines in this Advocate, in this article in the Advocate, that just, if this is accurate, just burn my chaps like you wouldn't believe. We've got somebody who is standing around waiting. Let's find out if there's actually a tornado. Let's have 3 tornado warnings before we figure out that the sirens aren't going off. And then when we finally figure that out, let's stand around with our thumb up our butts, excuse me, and wait and find out if there's actually a tornado before we set off the sirens manually. I'm telling you, it takes seconds. Just seconds. If you have that much advance warning, you're not going to be an 81-year-old man sitting in a bedroom in your bed that gets hit by a car. That's the one fatality that happened up in Salina. He was hit by a car sleeping in his bed. Imagine if he had been able to hear the sirens. Now, I don't know if the sirens went off in Mercer County or not. That's not what I'm talking about. But I'm telling you, it's just a fraction of a moment where lives could be lost. And to stand around and wait to find out what's going on before you decide to warn everybody in Licking County that we could be in harm's way is, to me, absolutely ridiculous. Licking County needs to get their act together. These sirens, they talked about not wanting to add confusion. I don't care if people are confused or not. If the siren's going off, get down in your basement. You get down in your basement, you find out there's nothing wrong. Yeehaw, you're in your basement. Big deal. You're alive. You're healthy. I'd rather do that than be confused and sit in my bedroom watching the TV trying to figure out, well, should I go to the basement or not? Is there some storm? Is it not? Set off the sirens. We need to get this program fixed. We need to get these sirens fixed. If it's antiquated, if it's out of date, then we need to spend the money to upgrade and get something better. I don't know what it is. But you're playing around with people's lives. And it's absolutely unacceptable. Absolutely unacceptable. Now, like I say, there's 2 sides to every story. I don't know if the Advocate article is 100% accurate or not, but obviously it chapped my hind end big time. So it needs to get fixed. Mr. Mayor, if you could relay my information on to the county, and this needs to be done. It absolutely needs to be done. And we as a county seat need to hold their feet to the iron, to the fire, and make sure that it gets done. And when it does get done, I expect to hear back from somebody saying, yeah, we got this taken care of. Should be a big article in the paper, should be a big announcement, should be something That'll eliminate the confusion if you let everybody in Licking County know, hey, you know what? Our system that was broke, we fixed it. We took care of it. I think I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rath. Mr. Blake?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I am curious about the communication we got from Deborah Brown. If there has been any follow-up regarding that letter or anything, it'd be helpful if council could be aware of what occurred from that. So I don't know if you're aware, or if, I know Director Baum's outside, but
I'm aware of the letter. I don't know if there's been any follow-up, but I'll let you know.
That would be appreciated, because she also sent me a letter, so it'd be nice to know what the follow-up was there. Regarding the legislation and amendment tonight, you know, I appreciate Brian Moorhead. I know he's been with us for many, many years, but ultimately I work for constituents and the taxpayers in Newark. And when I go around and I listen to them, they're wanting their street paved. They're wanting their, you know, what's right in front of them paved. And local roads do not receive matching funds. And so if we had an opportunity, this was new revenue coming into our city, not affecting existing dollars, but this was new revenue, being able to target it towards local roads to be able to pave those streets. To be able to pave those streets that haven't been paved in 20 years or so. And there are numerous around here. So I'm not just talking about patching up roads or doing the status quo. I'm talking about a scheduled program to get roads paved. That was the intent. It was to be able to provide a dedicated source to do that. And I also not going to apologize for the legislative process. You know, each of us are legislators. We have committees. We're allowed to make motions. We have motions that we're allowed to make on the full floor of council. So you know, if a person hasn't received information in a timely manner, we're allowed to make motions when the legislation's up. And so that was what was done tonight. And so I'm not going to apologize for that. So that's just where we were. And so, you know, I do think that some attention needs to be paid to local roads. There are many neighborhoods in our community that have not been touched for a long, long time. And, you know, yes, I understand the large major thoroughfares need to be taken care of, but we have to give some attention to neighborhood roads. And that was the intent with what I was trying to do. And I do want to thank Councilman Fennell for your seconding that motion. If I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Blake. Mr. Buck? I will pass it. Thank you, Mr. Buck. Mr. Cost?
I want to reiterate something I said before. I don't think any of us have any argument that there are neighborhood streets that need paved. There definitely are. And thankfully, we're finally going to have some funds that's going to allow us to do considerably more paving than we've been able to do in the past. So I'm expecting to see major roads paved and collector roads paved and neighborhood streets paved. And I know, as Mr. Rath said, this isn't going to happen overnight. It isn't going to happen in 1 month. But as we go through this process, if we see that neighborhood streets aren't being paved, I think we need to make a point of it. I think we need to say that not only are the major streets and collector streets, but our neighborhood streets. And I think we need to make the engineer's office aware. I've done that on a number of occasions. I've called in and said, I've got neighbors calling me about this one street and it's a mess. And I'm going out to see it, and 9 times out of 10, it is a mess. And it needs done. So I think we're finally going to have some funds to get ahead of this, get on schedule. And I think we just need to be vigilant and make sure that the job's getting done at all different levels. I think that's important to this community. Thank you. I'll pass.
Thank you, Mr. Cost. Mr. Fournette?
I guess I need to call a Streets Committee meeting. And I'd also like to encourage everybody to come out and support Newark Pride this weekend at the Canal Market District. It is from 2 to 7 p.m. Canal Market District. Everybody is welcome. I hope to see everybody there. With that, I will pass.
Thank you, Mr. Fournette. And Mr. Freeman.
Oh, Mr. President, at the end today, thank goodness.
Last and possibly least.
I would like to say thank you to Mr. Rath for his passion on the EMS subject, and that's absolutely the right stance to take. Is if something is broken, it needs to be fixed, and the people that are accountable for it need to fix it. When it comes to the paving legislation, I hope that we'll talk about in the press the $1.2 million paving program that we currently have, the additional $1.1 million that's going to be allocated with this gas tax And also, those funds will continue to be used for local street paving. There's nothing that says that this will all go to federal matching dollars. Local streets will be paved, federal dollars will be used. We have a great opportunity to address the needs in our community, and we've made sure that we've opened it up. I would like to thank everybody for the Memorial Day service that we had at Cedar Hill Cemetery. Very well done. And it is the 75th anniversary of D-Day, and so I just want to make sure everybody reflects on the service and the sacrifice people have made for this country. I'm also excited for the progress that's happening in North Street Park, and we continue to see things steadily occur, and hopefully we get the new equipment in there by the end of the year, hopefully in the fall. When it comes to the $30,000 homeless study that continues to be tabled in finance, I kind of thought that with the RFP and the understanding, there was enough transparency there to move it forward, but we'll wait until the additional pieces come into play. We have a full understanding of what the budget is, and then we'll move it forward. I also want to thank Director Motter for the economic development, the logo and branding, and coming to us for our feedback. The piece that grinds my gears, I don't know if that's the terminology Jeff Rath used tonight, is the Newark advocate role in politics. And when it comes to a news source, impartiality is key. And when it comes to the articles that we see being presented being one-sided and non-transparent and really not encapsulating the events that are occurring, it raises into serious question the impartiality of the newspaper. And when it comes to 4,000 Republicans and a vast majority of people in Newark being classified as independents, when we see a troubled newspaper continuing to polarize our community, it really raises into question the long-standing ability for it to be sustained. And so I would really appreciate if the editor and the news article writers would take a more impartial and unbiased approach to those articles and really represent the community as a whole. And with that, I'll yield.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. Just a few bookkeeping things. If anyone has any positive or negative comments about the branding information presented at Economic Development, if you could get that to Autumn by Friday, and I'll pass it along to that group. Our next council and committee meeting will be June 17th. Again, 2 weeks from tonight. Committees will start at 5:45. Full council will start promptly at 7. Thank you for coming tonight. I appreciate your attention. So motion by Mr. Cost, second by Mr. Lutis. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. At the same time, we're adjourned. Thank you.